Galveston Island, Texas, 2008. Two dead coyotes on the shoulder of the road, months apart, legs too long, muzzles too narrow, coats too red to be right. This video is about the red wolf, a species the US government declared extinct in the wild in 1980. Most people assume that's the end of the story, gone, then rebuilt from scratch in a North Carolina breeding program. But DNA pulled from that roadkill, and dozens like it since, says something else, that red wolf genes never actually left the wild at all. We'll walk through the studies, the population data, and the 50-year paper trail that makes this an open question, not a closed one. If you've ever driven through the rural South and seen just a coyote on the shoulder of the road, there's a real, documented chance you were wrong, and so was almost everyone else who saw it too. The question isn't whether the red wolf actually went extinct in 1980, it's how much of it we'd have to find alive today before anyone agreed to call it back. The 2018 discovery on Galveston Island was one finding, from two dead animals. Science does not build a case on two animals. So in the years after, researchers went back and asked a harder question. Was that a fluke or a pattern? The answer came in 2022. A team led by Tanner Barnes and Kristen Brzezinski, published in the journal BMC Ecology and Evolution, expanded the sample. Not two roadkill coyotes this time. 203 fecal samples collected across Galveston Island and the Texas mainland. 201 more data points than the first study had. What they found held up. 24 coyotes on the island and 8 more on the mainland carried more than 10% red wolf ancestry. 2 of the mainland animals crossed 50%. That is not a rounding error, that is half a genome. The study went further, comparing these animals against more than 100 southeastern coyotes, 19 captive red wolves, and 38 gray wolves. The team built the largest reference library of its kind. And in that library, 5 genetic variants showed up that matched nothing else on the shelf. Private alleles. Not in the coyotes. Not in the wolves held in captivity since 1980. Genetic material with nowhere else to have come from. Here is what this point does not prove. It does not prove a hidden population of pure red wolves living wild in Texas. These are coyotes, hybridized, carrying inherited fragments. But the scale of the sample is what earns this point its place early in the case. This was not one lucky tissue sample. This was 203 data points, cross-checked against the largest reference library of red wolf and coyote genetics assembled for the purpose. If the question is whether the red wolf's genome survived somewhere the government never accounted for, this is the study built specifically to answer it at scale. And the data came back yes. That study, the 203 samples, did not start in a lab. It started with one person, on the ground, years earlier, before anyone had a name for what he was looking at. His name is Ron Wooten, a former fisheries biologist living on Galveston Island, Texas. Around 2008, he started noticing coyotes that did not look right to him. Legs too long, muzzles too narrow, coats with a reddish cast that standard Texas coyotes do not carry. For years, he did what a trained observer does. He watched. He tracked sightings with the help of neighbors. He waited for proof instead of a theory. Proof came from the road. Wooten collected tissue samples from 2 coyotes killed by traffic and sent them to Bridget Von Holt, an evolutionary geneticist at Princeton University. Her lab ran the DNA. What came back surprised even her. These were not ordinary coyotes. Roughly 30% of their genetic material traced to red wolves, a species declared extinct in the wild 28 years earlier. Not extinct on paper only, extinct in every official wild population count since 1980. Von Holt's team gave the finding a name that stuck: ghost alleles. Genetic material from an animal the record said was gone, still circulating in a living population unnoticed for decades. Think about what that means. An extinction date is not a biological event. It is a bureaucratic one. A line drawn on the day the last confirmed individual was accounted for. This finding says the line and the truth may not be the same thing. This is not a hidden pack of red wolves running free in Texas. It is inherited fragments in a hybrid population. But those fragments had to come from somewhere, and somewhere was not supposed to still exist. Texas is a striking case, but it is also, on its own, a small one. And the honest version of this story has to sit with that. Here is what the record actually shows, plainly, before any interpretation. The only wild population of red wolves officially recognized anywhere on Earth is the reintroduced group in eastern North Carolina, managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under a program that began in 1987. As of recent counts, that population sits somewhere between 25 and 40 animals, depending on the year and the survey. Some counts put the known, trackable number closer to 26. That is not a large margin for error. That is a population you could fit in a school gymnasium. And there is more the honest version has to include. Gunshot mortality, the very thing that gutted this population for years, has genuinely improved. No confirmed gunshot deaths have been reported since May 2023, following coyote sterilization programs and stronger enforcement. That is real progress, not spin. So here is the question a careful viewer should be asking right now. If red wolf genetics survived undetected in Texas for decades, why hasn't anyone found a comparable population somewhere else? Why is Galveston the only confirmed case? That is a fair question, and the honest answer involves geography and effort, not certainty. Galveston Island is small, isolated, and heavily monitored by a dedicated group of researchers and citizen volunteers who have spent over a decade tracking its coyotes specifically. Most of the rural Gulf Coast has never received that level of genetic scrutiny. Absence of detection is not the same as absence of the thing. It may simply mean nobody has looked as closely anywhere else. That does not prove more ghost populations exist. It means the one confirmed case exists specifically where somebody happened to be looking hard enough to find it. To understand how a species ends up this fragile, you have to go back further than Texas, further than North Carolina, to how small the starting point actually was. Red wolves once ranged the entire eastern seaboard, Pennsylvania down to Florida, west through the Gulf states into Texas. This was not a regional animal. It was a continental one. Habitat clearing, predator eradication programs, and decades of unregulated killing pushed that range down to almost nothing by the 1970s. By then, the remaining wild red wolves had a second problem. They were interbreeding with coyotes at a rate that made the species itself hard to define. When the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service ran its final capture effort to save what was left, they trapped nearly 400 wild canines across the historic range. Only 43 were even considered candidates. Of those 43, only 17 were judged genetically pure red wolves. Of those 17, only 14 successfully reproduced in captivity. 14 animals. That is the entire genetic foundation of every red wolf alive today, wild or captive. If that number bothers you, it should. A species rebuilt from 14 founders carries almost no room for error, no redundancy, no margin if something goes wrong again. And if you want to actually sit with what a bottleneck that narrow does to a species long-term, inbreeding depression, disease vulnerability, the mathematics of how fast genetic diversity disappears, that is a deeper rabbit hole than this episode has room for. We've gone through cases like this before, species pulled back from single-digit founders, and it is worth its own investigation. If that is the kind of detail you want more of, that is exactly what this channel is built around. The number 14 is not a footnote here. It is the reason a handful of ghost genes in a Texas coyote matters so much. When your starting pool is this small, every surviving fragment counts.